Superman's darkest moment, he completely lost control. The sky over Metropolis that day was strangely clear, a golden, honey-like light illuminating the skyscrapers. Atop the United Nations building, the flag of Krypton, a rare sight, fluttered alongside the flags of the 193 member states. Clark Kent stood on the podium, awkwardly adjusting his tie, knowing billions of eyes worldwide were watching him on screens. Today wasn't Superman Day. That was his request. Today was Earth's Day, to honor the idea of what he represented, not his power. But for Clark, it was the day he felt smallest, because in the audience below, in the first row, Martha Kent sat, her eyes glistening with tears, her hand clasped tightly in Jonathan's. "My son," she whispered, her voice trembling and completely lost in the thunderous applause. But Clark heard her. He always heard his mother's voice, no matter how many other sounds were playing. It was the frequency of his heart. After the ceremony, when the flashing of the press had faded and the diplomatic limousines had departed, the Kent family sat in a small room on the top floor overlooking the city. John, 11 years old, with jet black hair and blue eyes just like his father's, excitedly recounted his discovery that he could hear ants crawling in his grandmother's garden in Smallville. "It sounds like dry leaves rustling, Dad, but it's tiny. Can you hear it?" John asked, his feet not touching the floor, swinging back and forth. Clark knelt down to his son's eye level, placing his hand on the boy's shoulder. "I remember that feeling. But you have to learn to regulate the volume in your head, John. Otherwise, you won't be able to hear the most important things." "Like what?" "Like Mom's voice when she calls you home for dinner, or the voice of someone in need amidst a million noises." Clark smiled. Behind him, Lois leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, watching her husband and son with boundless love. Martha approached, handing Clark a homemade cookie she'd hidden in her bag. "I know you don't need these, but I made them with all my heart." Clark took a bite. It was crisp, the butter and vanilla melting in his mouth, the taste of childhood, the taste of home. "I love you, Mom, you know." "I know, darling." Martha reached out and stroked his cheek, her wrinkled palm strangely warm. "But today the whole world loves you too, Clark. I'm proud of you, not because you're Superman, but because you're a good man. It was a perfect day. And perhaps, precisely because it was so perfect, when everything collapsed, it shattered into sharp, irreparable pieces. 10 days later, the Sunflower Festival in Smallville. The endless fields of sunflowers stretched out like a golden ocean under the June sun. This was an annual event that Martha Kent co-organized. She loved sunflowers. They always turned towards the sun, no matter how stormy the day before. Meanwhile, in Metropolis, things were going badly. Lex Luthor, sitting in his secret underground laboratory, LexCorp, smiled at his monitor. He had just unleashed 3 trump cards at once. Parasite, released from a STAR Labs laboratory, had its solar energy absorption capabilities amplified tenfold thanks to the nanotechnology Lex provided. Superman charged into battle with Parasite in the Metropolis port area, but something was wrong. Every time he landed a punch, Parasite didn't fall. Instead, it grew even stronger, its dark purple skin glowing like a nuclear reactor. "Don't you understand, Superman?" Parasite roared, its enormous hand gripping his arm. "Today I am not your enemy. I am merely bait." A terrifying explosion echoed from the horizon, not from Metropolis. The sound came from the northwest, towards Kansas. Clark's heart sank. He mustered all his strength to push Parasite away and soared into the air, shattering the sound barrier dozens of times over. But the distance from Metropolis to Smallville was over 1,200 miles. Even at Superman's speed, it took a few seconds. Those few seconds, for an ordinary person, were just a blink of an eye. But for a catastrophe, it was a lifetime. When Superman landed in Smallville's central square, where the festival was supposed to be taking place, all he saw was billowing black smoke, rubble, and screams. Martha Kent's stall was completely flattened. He saw Pa Kent first. Jonathan was kneeling beside a small figure, his white hair stained with soot and blood. As Clark approached, time seemed to stand still. Martha lay there, her eyes open, but the light in them had faded. On her chest, her favorite pale purple floral dress was now soaked in a spreading crimson. Jonathan embraced her, his shoulders trembling, but not a single tear fell. He had cried himself to sleep. She pushed a child out of the way, Jonathan said, his voice hoarse, without looking up. It was always like that, Clark. She always thought of others first. Clark collapsed to his knees. His hands, capable of lifting an entire continent, trembled uncontrollably as they touched his mother's face. Her skin was still warm. She hadn't been gone long. Perhaps she had waited for him. Perhaps she had tried to hold on to one last look at him, but her mortal body wouldn't allow it. "Mother." Clark's voice broke, not Superman's voice. It was the voice of a 6-year-old boy who had just discovered he couldn't fly to the moon, who had run home crying into his mother's arms. But this time, those arms would never hold him again. Jonathan finally looked up. His eyes, sunken and pained, stared directly at his son. He said nothing, not a word of reproach. But in those eyes, Clark read a truth more terrible than any curse. You didn't make it back in time. The funeral took place 3 days later, under a torrential rain. The small cemetery in Smallville had never been so crowded. There was the president, members of the Justice League, and hundreds of people Martha had helped throughout her humble life. Lois stood beside Clark, her hand gripping his. John clung to his father, his face drenched in rain and tears. He still didn't fully understand what was happening. Why was Grandma in that wooden box? Why was everyone crying? Most importantly, why was Dad so silent? "Dad," John whispered, gently tugging at Clark's cloak. Can you do something? You're Superman." Clark didn't answer. His eyes didn't blink. They stared at the coffin being lowered into the damp earth, as if looking through the wood, through the soil, into a void he could never reach with all his strength. As the last handful of earth was thrown, Clark turned and walked away. He said no goodbyes to anyone. He didn't answer the reporters waiting at the cemetery gate. He simply flew up, a vertical line through the dark clouds into the boundless expanse of the atmosphere where no one could hear his scream. And he screamed. A wordless scream, not from his mouth, but from the very Kryptonian energy within him. It created an earthquake in the ionosphere, causing the aurora borealis to appear askew in the southern hemisphere sky. When he returned to Earth, 7 days had passed. In Superman's eyes, once as blue as a Kansas summer sky, now had a faint reddish tint around the pupils. It hadn't disappeared. Lex Luthor sat in his office on the top floor of LexCorp, sipping a 40-year-old scotch. When the window behind him shattered into 1,000 shards, he didn't even flinch. "Finally, you've arrived," Lex said, slowly turning his chair around. "I was starting to think you'd let me off the hook." Superman stood there, amidst the glittering shards of glass at his feet. His suit was covered in cosmic dust. He said nothing. "Come on, don't look at me like that. I only funded the technology. I didn't press the button. I didn't plant the bomb. I wasn't even there. You're the one who failed to save her, Clark." Lex deliberately emphasized the mundane name, as if insulting him. Superman took a step forward. The super-strength Lexium glass, the kind that can withstand a small nuclear explosion, began to vibrate violently. It didn't shatter immediately, but the sound it made was like the groaning of a dying creature. "Superman, this wall," Superman said, his voice hoarse as if he hadn't spoken to anyone in a week. "It was designed to stop me. How much did you spend on it, Lex? $1 billion? $2 billion? Lex narrowed his eyes. He hadn't anticipated this exchange. "Let me tell you a truth," Superman continued, his eyes turning increasingly red. "No wall on Earth can stop me. I just always choose not to break them." Crack. A spiderweb-like crack appeared in the glass. "I chose not to kill you, not because I couldn't, but because my mother, the woman you indirectly murdered, taught me that there are boundaries a good person should never cross, even if they have the power to do so." Superman moved closer to the glass. His face was only centimeters from Lex's, distorted by the spreading cracks. She was wrong. The entire glass wall shattered, not like ordinary glass, but melted into a molten lava under the heat of Superman's gaze. Lex fell backward from his chair, his scotch glass crashing to the floor, soaking into the expensive Persian carpet. But Superman didn't kill him. He stood there, looking down at the trembling Lex Luthor, and for the first time in his life, he felt a powerful urge to crush a human heart with his own hands. The muscles in his arms twitched. The veins bulged. This wasn't a battle with an enemy. This was a battle with his darkest self. He turned and walked away. Not because he forgave Lex. He walked away because he knew that if he stayed another second, Clark Kent would truly be dead, and what remained would be more terrifying than any villain Earth had ever faced. 6 months after that fateful night at LexCorp, the phrase, "Superman save me," gradually faded from the everyday language of the people of Metropolis. They still saw him, a dark figure tearing through the sky, but he no longer stopped to save a cat in a tree or pull a bus from a cliff. Those small acts seemed alien to a god consumed by grief. Instead, Superman began a relentless campaign of punishment, starting with Metallo. He was found in an alleyway in Gotham City, not defeated, but destroyed. The kryptonite core, powering his mechanical body, had been extracted by Superman's bare hands, leaving behind a twisted pile of metal and a dying man with less than 5% of his biological body remaining. "Take him to the Ghost Zone," Superman ordered Belle Reeves' agents as he dropped the criminal onto the prison yard. No trial. Amanda Waller, the prison warden, stepped out with a cold expression. She was one of the few people on Earth unafraid of Superman's power. "That's not how justice works, Superman." Superman turned to look at her. His eyes now had permanent red streaks around his blue pupils, a constant reminder of the smoldering fire within. "Justice died in Smallville 6 months ago, Waller. What works now is the consequences." Night fell. The signal bat shone low in the clouds, but this time it wasn't a call for help. It was an invitation, a challenge. Batman stood there, his shadow blending into the stone gargoyles of the GCPD building. He didn't need to turn to know who had landed behind him. "It took you 6 months to dare face me," Batman said, his voice hoarse. "I thought you'd come sooner." "I didn't come to face you, Bruce. I came to warn you," Superman said. But his voice held no warmth. It was flat and icy like the Arctic ice. "Don't interfere with what I'm doing." Batman slowly turned around. Beneath the mask, his eyes remained unwavering. "What you're doing is turning yourself into the very person we swore to destroy. Don't you see? Every time you throw someone into the Ghost Zone without trial, you take one step closer to the tyranny that Luthor always accused you of becoming." "Luthor?" Superman let out a sound that was almost like laughter, but it was distorted and painful. "Luthor is still alive. He's living in his tower, drinking scotch and laughing at me every night. Do you know why? Because I chose not to kill him. I chose my mother's path. And look where that path has led me to her grave." "Clark," Batman began, but it was a mistake. "Don't call me by that name," Superman roared, and the entire GCPD building shook. Windows from the 1st to the 10th floor shattered simultaneously. Sirens blared from the police cars parked below. Clark Kent is dead. Dead with his mother, under the rubble of the Sunflower Festival. What remains before you now, Bruce, is a man with nothing left to lose. And that's what's truly terrifying. Superman advanced, each step shattering the concrete roof. He stopped just centimeters from Batman. His icy breath brushed against the Dark Knight's mask. "So, this is my only warning. Don't interfere. Don't send your robot army. Don't make contingency plans, because if you do, I won't defeat you, Bruce. I will destroy you." Superman soared into the sky, leaving Batman alone on the rooftop, amidst hundreds of shattered glass fragments. He watched the receding red and blue figure, and for the first time in years, Batman felt an emotion he rarely experienced. Fear. Not fear for myself, but fear for the whole world. A week later, things reached a climax. Intelligence from Themyscira indicated that a remnant group of Intergang, armed with apocalyptic weapons secretly smuggled into Earth by Darkseid himself, was establishing an underground operational base in Karak. The threat was real, but how Superman handled it was the real issue. No notification to the Alliance, no coordination with the Karak government, no warning to evacuate civilians in the surrounding area. Superman simply appeared in the skies over the Middle Eastern nation's capital, his eyes blazing red like 2 miniature suns, and began leveling the entire underground complex below. Layers of earth, concrete, and steel were sliced through like butter by his thermal vision. Hundreds of civilians living above panicked and fled as the ground beneath their feet shook violently. A massive fissure appeared in the street, swallowing 3 cars. Screams echoed everywhere. Superman paid no attention. He focused all his attention on the base below, where the Intergang soldiers were being roasted alive in their own fortress. This wasn't a rescue, this was an execution. "Superman!" A commanding voice ripped through the air. Wonder Woman landed before him, shield and sword ready. Behind her, Green Lantern, Hal Jordan, and Flash were evacuating trapped civilians. Martian Manhunter emerged from the ground, his green eyes filled with profound sadness at what his Kryptonian friend had done. "Diana, get out of the way." Superman's voice was unwavering. He didn't even look her in the eye. "No." Wonder Woman raised her shield. "Clark, we can't let you do this. There are innocent people on the surface. There are children. There are families," I said. "Get out of the way." Superman lunged at Wonder Woman with incredible speed. The impact created a shockwave that leveled all remaining buildings within a half-mile radius. The 2 gods clashed in the sky above Karak, each punch producing a sonic boom. Wonder Woman fought with all the strength of an Amazon warrior, but Superman today was not the teammate she once knew. He held nothing back, no defense, only offense. One punch pierced her defenses, knocking her shield hundreds of meters away. A sweeping kick sent her crashing into the side of a mountain, creating a gaping crater. Wonder Woman struggled to her feet, blood trickling from the corner of her mouth, but she stood firm. She was a warrior. She would never fall. "Wake up, Clark!" she screamed, but that only enraged Superman further. He grasped the lasso of truth she was projecting, and instead of being bound by it, his own frenzied willpower caused the sacred cord to tremble violently. The truth the lasso reflected in his eyes wasn't the truth of Clark Kent. It was the truth of a man who believed the whole world had betrayed him. "Let me." Green Lantern lunged forward, his willpower creating a massive wall of green energy to separate Superman and Diana. But Superman turned, his blazing red eyes fixed on the ring. "You want to test my willpower, Jordan?" Superman snarled. He didn't attack physically. He simply opened his mind, exposing all the pain, loss, and pure rage he had suppressed for the past 6 months. That immense amount of emotion slammed into the ring like a tsunami crashing against a sandbar. Green Lantern's willpower structure shattered, then vanished. Hal Jordan clutched his head, collapsing to the ground, blood gushing from his nose. Impossible. So much pain. Hal stammered, stunned. Flash was the last. He lunged at Superman at lightning speed, unleashing thousands of punches in a millionth of a second. But Superman was faster. He caught Flash's wrist midair, squeezing so tightly Barry Allen felt his bones shatter. "Your speed won't save them, Barry," Superman whispered, the chill in his voice more terrifying than any roar. "You're the fastest man in the world, but you still can't outrun death." He tossed Flash to the ground beside his fallen teammates. Martian Manhunter was the only one who didn't attack. He just stood there, hovering in midair, looking at Superman with teary eyes. "I can sense your mind, Kal-El. It's like a dying star burning most intensely just before it fades away. You still have time to stop." Superman stared at John Johns for a long moment. For a brief instant, his fiery red eyes softened, and the primal blue flickered like the sun after a storm, but then it vanished. "My time ran out the day my mother died," he said, preparing to deliver the final blow to Intergang Base. That's when he saw Batman. The Dark Knight stood atop a crumbling building, his cloak billowing in the hot desert wind. In his hand wasn't a batarang, nor a grappling gun. It was a small pistol containing a single bullet. The bullet emitted an eerie green glow even under the blazing Middle Eastern sun. "I hoped I'd never have to use this," Batman said, his voice chillingly calm. "I promised you long ago that I wouldn't build any more kryptonite weapons. But I also promised myself something else, that I would never let anyone, including you, become a threat I couldn't stop." Superman turned completely toward Batman. His focus shifted from the Intergang Base to the man in the Batcape. "You think that bullet could kill me, Bruce? I think you want it to kill you," Batman replied. And the truth in that statement made Superman freeze for a fraction of a second. "That's why you're here, isn't it? That's why you pushed us all away. You want to be stopped. You want someone to end it all. Because you're afraid of what you're becoming. You know nothing." Superman lunged at Batman, but instead of dodging, Batman stood still, raised his gun, and pulled the trigger. The kryptonite bullet lodged in Superman's left shoulder, close enough to his heart to temporarily paralyze him, but not enough to kill him. It was a perfectly calculated shot, a Batman shot. Superman collapsed to one knee, the radioactive poison spreading throughout his body. The physical pain shouldn't have been a match for his strength, but kryptonite was always the exception. It burned every cell, every nerve. But even kneeling, he reached out, grabbed Batman by the throat, and lifted him off the ground. Superman's hand trembled. His muscles tensed from the kryptonite, but the power of his rage was still enough to crush the trachea of any mortal man. His fingers tightened slowly. Batman didn't struggle. He just stared straight into Superman's blazing red eyes. "You aren't the murderer." Batman struggled to utter each word. "Clark Kent isn't," Superman replied, his voice filled with pain and rage. "But Clark Kent is dead, along with his mother, along with his beliefs, along with a small voice echoed in his head, not from the outside world, from within, a voice he had locked deep within his mind for the past 6 months. "Dad?" Superman froze. The hand gripping Batman's neck loosened slightly. He turned, and on the edge of the battlefield, amidst the rubble and smoke, stood Lois. She held John tightly, but he struggled free. John stood there, his clear blue eyes, just like his father's, looking at him with an emotion Superman never thought he'd see in his son. Fear. John was afraid of him. "Dad." "Why did you do that to Uncle Bruce?" John asked, his voice trembling. "You said Superman was a protector of everyone. You said we should never use our powers to hurt others. You said." Superman released Batman. The Dark Knight fell to the ground, coughing violently, but his gaze remained fixed on his old friend. "John," Superman stammered, his voice, for the first time in 6 months, no longer a cold command. It was weak, shattered like a broken mirror. "You don't understand. Grandma, I know Grandma is dead," John cried out, tears streaming down his face. "I'm so sad too. I miss Grandma every day. But she taught me that good people don't hurt others just because they're hurting themselves. She taught me that, and she taught Dad that too. Why did you forget?" John's words struck Superman harder than any kryptonite bullet, harder than any punch from Wonder Woman, stronger than any willpower structure from Green Lantern. It was the purest truth, uttered from his one-year-old son, and it pierced through every defense he had built around his broken heart. In that moment, Superman saw himself through John's eyes. He didn't see a hero. He didn't see a father. He saw a monster, exactly like the ones he had fought against, and that realization was so terrifying that he wanted to disappear from the universe forever. He opened his mouth to say something, an apology, an explanation, anything, but no words came out. Instead, Superman soared into the sky, vanishing from sight in a fraction of a millisecond, leaving behind a devastated battlefield and a weeping family. Superman did not return to the Fortress of Solitude, nor did he go to Smallville, where he often sought solace during his darkest days. Instead, he flew to the furthest reaches of the North Pole, a place of eternal ice where no living creature could survive. He landed on a massive iceberg and stood there, motionless as a statue, letting the bone-chilling cold, a sensation he could not even feel, envelop him. That was where Brainiac found him. The colossal skull-shaped ship emerged from a wormhole, casting a vast shadow over the entire Arctic region. Massive metallic tentacles slowly descended, and from the center of the ship, a humanoid figure stepped out. Brainiac, in his physical form, with pale green skin and electronic circuits running across his body, advanced towards Superman. "Kal-El of Krypton," Brainiac's voice echoed, not from his mouth but from every direction at once, as if the atmosphere itself were emitting the sound. "The last specimen of an extinct race. I have tracked you for the past 6 planetary cycles. Your moral degradation is a phenomenon worthy of study." Superman did not turn around. "Go away, Brainiac. Today is not your day. On the contrary, Kal-El, today is exactly my day." Brainiac raised his hand, and from his palm, a black cloud, in reality, billions upon billions of black nanobots, sprayed out and surrounded Superman. "Lex Luthor invited me here to destroy you, but I have a higher purpose. I do not wish to destroy you. I wish to collect you." A Kryptonian steeped in despair, having lost his own ideals, that is, a specimen more precious than any shrunken city. Superman spun around, his eyes flashing a brilliant red. He unleashed a high-intensity burst of heat vision toward Brainiac, but the cloud of nanobots immediately absorbed the energy and grew denser. They clung to him, covering his entire body, and as they entered his nervous system through his pores, Superman felt a pain unlike any he had ever known. This was not physical pain. This was an attack on his very mind. The world around Superman dissolved. The Arctic ice, Brainiac's ship, everything vanished, replaced by an infinite white void. He stood there in his Superman suit, but as he looked down, he saw his suit had turned pitch black. The S symbol on his chest was no longer the red and gold of hope, but the crimson of dried blood. "Welcome to your own mind," a voice rang out. Superman whipped around. Standing before him was himself, but not the Superman he knew. This version wore a suit of pure black, with eyes glowing permanently red like 2 pits of hellfire. He had the same face, the same body, but his expression was entirely different. It was the face of a man with nothing left to lose, of one who had liberated himself from all rules and restraints. "Who are you?" Superman asked, though he already knew the answer. "I am you," the dark Superman replied, stepping forward with a confident gait. "I am the part of you that you've tried to suppress for 30 years. The part that wanted to kill Lex Luthor in his office that night. The part that wanted to snap Batman's neck when he shot you in the shoulder. The part that is tired of being the world's good boy. I am not you. Are you not?" Dark Superman laughed loudly. His laughter echoed through the white space, distorted and terrifying. Then tell me, who threw 5 criminals into the Phantom Zone without a trial? Who nearly killed his closest teammates? Who looked into his son's eyes and saw fear reflecting back? That was all you, Kal-El, not me. You. Every word from Dark Superman felt like a blade stabbing directly into Clark's wounded soul. He wanted to argue, but he couldn't, because it was all true. Why resist? Dark Superman continued, his voice becoming smooth and seductive. It feels like freedom, doesn't it? No more rules, no more expectations, no more pain from trying to be good. Your mother died because she was weak. But we are not. We are pure power. We can reshape this world exactly how we want it. Shut up, Superman growled. Or what? You'll kill me? Dark Superman spread his arms wide in invitation. Come on, try it. But remember, killing me means killing yourself. And you know what? Perhaps that's exactly what you want. Perhaps you want to die, to be reunited with her. Isn't that why you stood still when Batman shot you? Superman lunged into the attack. He and his dark self became entangled in a fierce battle within the white nothingness. Every punch created ripples of energy that radiated through his mental space. But the more he fought, the weaker Superman felt, while Dark Superman grew stronger. He was absorbing Clark's anger, turning it into his own strength. You cannot defeat me with violence, Dark Superman said, effortlessly blocking one of Clark's punches. I was born from violence, from pain, from loss. The angrier you get, the stronger I become. And you, Kal-El, are very, very angry. Superman was hurled backward, slamming hard against the floor of his mind. He lay there, gasping for breath, and for the first time in his life, he felt utterly helpless. And then, a small light appeared. It started as a faint speck of light on the horizon of his mindscape, but it grew until Superman realized it was an image, a memory, no, a sequence of memories, projected like a film. He saw himself at 6 years old, standing in the middle of a cornfield in Smallville, crying because he had just shattered a neighbor's window with his heat vision. Martha Kent knelt before him, wiping his tears, and said, "Having power doesn't mean you get to do everything you want, Clark. Real power is knowing when not to use it." He saw himself at 13, when he first lifted off the ground. Jonathan Kent stood below, looking up with eyes full of worry but also full of pride. "I can't teach you how to fly, son, but I can teach you how to land. There must always be a place to return to." He saw himself on fateful night at LexCorp, standing before Lex Luthor with a boiling rage in his chest, yet ultimately turning away. He had thought it was a failure. But now, looking back, he realized it was Martha Kent's final victory in his heart. She had saved him that night, even from beneath the cold ground. And finally, he saw images of Lois and John. They were standing in the kitchen of the Smallville farmhouse, a place once filled with laughter and the scent of freshly baked cookies. Lois looked at him with eyes full of love yet full of pain. And John looked up at him, his clear blue eyes reflecting the fear he had seen on the battlefield of Karak. "Dad," John said in the memory, his voice trembling, "why did you become the person you always told us we had to fight against?" That question pierced through every layer of Superman's defenses. It touched the deepest part of him, the part that even the Dark Superman could not reach. The part of Clark Kent, the boy from Smallville, Kansas, the son of Jonathan and Martha Kent. The part that believed absolutely in human goodness. The part that swore to protect Earth, not out of duty, but out of love. Clark stood up. "What are you doing?" the Dark Superman asked, a hint of unease in his voice for the first time. "You cannot defeat me. I am a part of you." "You're right," Clark replied, his voice now unnervingly calm. "You are a part of me. This rage, this pain, this thirst for revenge, they are all mine. I tried to deny you, lock you away, ignore you, but that was a mistake." He stepped toward the Dark Superman, not with the intent to attack, but with open arms. Because denying you also means denying the love I have for my mother, denying the pain of losing her. She deserves to be mourned. She deserves my tears. The Dark Superman stepped back. What are you doing?" "I am accepting you," Clark said. He stood directly in front of his dark self. "Because you are a part of me, but you are not all of me. I am also what my mother taught. Compassion, forgiveness, hope, and above all, I am Clark Kent. Not just Superman, not just Kal-El. I am Martha Kent's son. That woman may be gone, but what she taught me will never die." He reached out and embraced the Dark Superman. For a moment, the dark entity tensed, ready to resist. But then, slowly, he began to dissolve, not vanishing into nothingness, but transforming into particles of warm golden light, like sunlight. Those particles seeped into Clark's body, merging into every cell, and for the first time in 6 months, he felt whole. "I don't understand," the dark Superman whispered before completely disappearing. "How can you forgive yourself?" "Because that is what Mom would do," Clark replied, tears streaming down his cheeks in the mindscape. "She would forgive me. And if she can forgive me, then I must learn to forgive myself." The mindscape shattered into a million shards of light. In the real world, Brainiac was preparing to move Superman's motionless body into a collection pod. But just as his robotic arms touched Superman's shoulders, a miracle happened. Superman opened his eyes. His eyes were no longer the burning red of rage. They had returned to a clear sky blue, but deeper, brighter, as if someone had lit a new fire from within. The black nanobots on his body began to crack and fall away, not because they were destroyed by physical strength, but because they were designed to devour despair. And Superman was no longer in despair. "Impossible," Brainiac uttered, his voice carrying a hint of emotion for the first time in his millennia of existence. It was astonishment. "You defeated my algorithm? How can an organic being overcome psychological pain that I amplified 1,000-fold?" Superman stood up. He didn't charge at Brainiac with fists. He simply stood there, radiating a warm solar glow from his own body, the solar energy he had absorbed, now purified by the peace in his soul. "Because Brainiac," Superman said, his voice returning to its familiar warmth, "you tried to destroy me using my pain, but you forgot one thing. Pain is not something to be destroyed. It is something to learn from. I loved my mother with all my heart, and the pain of losing her is a testament to that love. Today, I choose not to let pain turn me into a monster anymore. I will let it turn me into a better person, just as she would have wanted." The light from Superman's body flared intensely, sweeping away the remaining nanobot cloud and piercing straight into Brainiac's ship. Not to destroy it, but to disable the control systems. Superman flew up through the ship's hull like an arrow of light, and within seconds, he was face to face with Brainiac in the main control chamber. "You will be sent to the Phantom Zone," Superman declared, "but not as an act of revenge, as an act of justice. You will have time to reflect on what you've done, Brainiac. Who knows? Perhaps one day, you too will find something worth hoping for." Before Brainiac could react, Superman activated the Phantom Zone projector on the ship itself, and the entire vessel, along with its master, was sucked into the prison dimension. The battle was over. Hours later, at the Justice League Memorial, Metropolis, Superman landed softly before the giant bronze statue of the League's founding members. Night had fallen, and the city lights shimmered on the artificial lake in front of him. He wasn't wearing the black suit. He had returned to his traditional red and blue, but with a small difference. On his chest, beneath the shield, was a small yellow sunflower embroidered. Batman stood there, in the shadows, as always. But this time, as Superman approached, the Dark Knight did not retreat. He stood still, and as Superman stopped before him, the two men looked at each other in silence for a long time. "I lost, Bruce," Superman finally spoke. His voice was deep and warm, but carried a profound sadness. "I lost to myself. I hurt everyone I loved. I betrayed everything I ever stood for." Batman didn't answer immediately. He stepped out of the shadows, moonlight reflecting off his cowl. And then, he did something rare. He placed a hand on Superman's shoulder. "You did lose," Batman agreed. "But you also won. That's what matters." He paused, then added, "I know what it's like to lose parents, Clark. I know how far that pain can drive a person into the darkness. But I also know, because you taught me this, that there is always a way back. There is always light at the end of the tunnel. You just have to dare to step toward it." Superman Mirmkui. It was a sad smile, but a real one, the first in 6 months. "Thank you, Bruce, for not giving up, for shooting me, for believing that Clark Kent was still in there somewhere." "Don't make me do it again," Batman said, though the corner of his mouth twitched slightly beneath the mask, a nearly unrecognizable smile. "I hate using guns. The Kent farm, Smallville." The next morning, Clark Kent pushed open the door to the familiar kitchen. The faint scent of vanilla cookies still lingered, even though 6 months had passed since that scent was last created. Jonathan Kent sat at the kitchen table, his hands trembling as he lifted a coffee cup. He had aged significantly since the day Martha passed, but when he saw his son walk in, his eyes lit up. "You've come home," Jonathan said, his voice raspy. "I'm sorry, Dad," Clark said, kneeling beside his father. "I'm sorry for leaving. for not being here when you needed me, for everything." Jonathan set the cup down and rubbed his son's head as if Clark were still a young boy. "Your mother would be so proud of you, Clark. Not because you're Superman, but because today you chose to come back." In the doorway, Lois stood there, her hand gripping John's. The boy looked up at his mother, then at his father, and for the first time since that day in Karak, the fear in John's eyes had vanished, replaced by a tentative spark of hope. "Dad?" John called out. Clark stood up and turned toward his son. He walked over slowly and knelt before John, just as Martha had once knelt before him when he was small. "I'm here, John," Clark said, "and I'm never leaving again. I promise." John threw himself into his father's arms, and Clark held his son tight. Lois stepped closer, wrapping her arms around them both. And in that moment, in the tiny kitchen of a Kansas farm, Superman had truly won. Not against an external enemy, not Brainiac, not Lex Luthor. He had conquered himself, conquered the darkness in his soul, and that was the greatest victory he had ever achieved. What do you think? Please let me know your thoughts in the comments. Thank you all very much.